last section of today. So the session that we start now with is the next panel, which is titled Governance Based on Vedic Wisdom. I'm sure the word governance strikes a chord with many of you, and it's a very relevant topic. So for this, we have got very esteemed panelists. We have Mr. Kailasnath Adhikari, who is the Director, Governance now, Sri Adhikari Brother Enterprise. So Kailash, if I could please ask you to come up, and His Holiness Bhaktirasamrita Swami Maharaj, if I could please request Maharaj to kindly come up to the stage. So ladies and gentlemen, could you please put your hands together for our esteemed panel? And you must be wondering who's the moderator. The moderator was supposed to have been Mr. Desai, and he's got a very bad throat. And so you'll have me as a poor substitute, and I'll try to do my best. So we heard in the last panel when Mr. Ashish Chauhan was talking about doing things that are legally allowed, but are morally not the right things to do. Right? And in today's day and time, we see this as a theme across all corporates, where we are trying to talk about it's not just enough to do what is allowed, but you have to do what is right. So I guess that's the framework for corporate governance, and the theme of today's topic is governance based on Vedic wisdom. Now, this whole concept of doing what is, not just doing what is right, and not just doing what is allowed, but doing what is right, that puts a lot of focus on the individual. You leave a lot to discretion, because you can achieve only that much through a framework or through a guideline by saying this is what is allowed. But then doing what is right is not as well defined, and that's why corporates are trying to say it's not just enough to follow what is allowed, but doing what is right. So maybe Kailash, I could start with you. So what, in your views, would define how would you manage this? Since you are very close to this topic, in an environment where you just not measure what is allowed, but what is right to do.
Thank you. So the main topic, like governance in a Vedic era. So when I was told about this topic, I thought it to be very interesting, and what startled to my mind was a topic called corporate governance, which has its presence not only in the Vedic era, as what my research told me, but also in the current times. Like if I date back and tell you about the ancient time, corporate governance was more about administration by the king. And now corporate governance, if we see in the context of business organizations, it's more handled by the board of directors, as we see. And as Artha Shastra rightly says it, that in the welfare of the subject lies the welfare of the king, and what is in the benefit of the subject lies in the benefit of the king. And if I try to ape that in today's time, I would say that what is the duty of the board of directors? If we call it like Ashish Bhai in the last panel discussion, he told that corporate entities for him are artificial entities created by the Companies Act. So the sole people who handle it are the board of directors. And the responsibility is that the board of directors have to act in the benefit of the shareholders, investors, various business ecosystem. So here you can see a kind of relation that we see during the ancient time and during the current time. And thus, corporate governance we can actually link. And there are various aspects which I thought that the modern business can actually learn from the ancient times. Like a very important aspect which was told at that particular point of time in the Vedic and the Mauryan period was right person for the right job. And that has been imbibed by Henry Fayol in his 14 Principles of Management. Unless you have right person for the right job, you cannot achieve a goal such as good governance. Because then you know what that particular person who is given that particular responsibility and is empowered to do so can actually manage. And this I can say from both the particular aspect, like since now I'm into the business, corporate governance in a business manner. But I would like to share my experience of governance in a public sector also, because I have seen that as well. And when I was told by the organizers that we are having it in Vada, I didn't tell them, but I would like to tell the audience here that I had undertaken in the Planning Commission of India, I had undertaken a project for Wada, Jawahar, and Mokhara, because since these are classified as the tribal areas, and Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment I used to handle in my office. So we had my boss, the member Planning Commission, erstwhile Planning Commission, Dr. Narendra Jadhav. He visited Jawahar and Mokhara as a tribal area and saw the dilapidated condition that the people, deplorable condition that the people are living into. And that really made us brainstorm in New Delhi that what we can do about this area. And we came up with 70 recommendations on the basis of local panchayat, on the basis of the local administrators, on the basis of state. And that 70 recommendations, we made it a point that we submitted not only to the Prime Minister's office, but to the Chief Minister's office in Maharashtra. And I'm very happy that some of the recommendations we were told that have been taken up. So before I resigned from the Planning Commission, I came to know that an aspect of governance which we thought would match up here has really been taken up. So my main aim was that governance in that is also focusing on what should be done right, because it is public sector and for the public good. But if we take it to the domain of the corporate sector, here also we have a structure laid down which says that the ecosystem in which a business operates or the corporate operates, it has to do right. For example, let's take a tobacco company or an alcohol producing company or a brewery. Anyone would, on the face of it, tell that, okay, what it's doing, it's not right. But it's legally allowed. But someone would argue it's morally not allowed, as Ashish Bhai also gave an example. But give it a thought. If an alcohol producing company or a tobacco company is paying all taxes on time, is taking care of its workforce, diligently following all rules and regulation, not violating any each law, is it not doing societal good by paying taxes on time? So there is a contrary belief and doing what is right morally or doing what is right legally.
Very, very nice point, and you've just left at the right point where I would like to turn on this rather debatable topic that Kailash has brought up to Maharaj. You've had this unique combination of seeing the corporate in your earlier days, and of course in the current time staying close to the corporates through your sessions and seminars, and of course a very deep knowledge of Vedic wisdom. So what would be, in your view, maybe one, to take the question that Kailash left with as a dilemma, whether, the example that he gave, and also getting broader on that same topic?
That is the difference between understanding information and data on one hand and having wisdom on the other hand. Wisdom is what makes the difference. Wisdom is what gives us the sense of discrimination, of what to do when. Life is all about dilemmas. Life is all about choices. From the smallest of choices, whether I should eat one chapati more or not, all the way up to very big issues that can affect the lives of millions of people. It's all about making the right choices. And the foundation for making the right choices are two. Number one, the right intention and the attitude. That is the proper consciousness and the frame of mind in which we take a decision. And the second is the proper knowledge on which that should be based. Knowledge in and of itself will not help. Intention in and of itself will not help. It is a combination of knowledge with proper consciousness and values and intention that actually makes wisdom. When that knowledge has been applied over a period of time and one has experienced many things, then that fructifies as wisdom. In the language of the Bhagavad Gita, we could call it Gyan and Vigyan. Gyan is knowledge and Vigyan is experienced knowledge, what we may call wisdom. So, even in the matters of governance, and not just governance, but in our day-to-day life and personal life, domestic life, social life, in all spheres of activity, there will always be such ethical and moral dilemmas where we are confronted with choices and we don't know what to do. And that is what life in this world is about. So the question is that when we are trying to understand what the right choice is in a given situation, what is our frame of reference? What are we going to base our decision upon? What kind of knowledge are we going to base our inference upon? So that is where we look for something that is more stable, more enduring, something that is more lasting, more sublime, and that is not subject to the vagaries of the human whim. Human-made laws are ever-changing. They are subject to the whimsical notions of people at any given point in time. They are subjected to the exigencies and pressures of situations from time to time, and they cannot be understood to be eternally valid. It is even difficult to understand what are basic principles. I mean, this is one thing we all will agree with, I'm sure, that, for example, when we have people of different propensities, different thoughts and beliefs, and how do you integrate all of them on a common platform? And everybody will say yes, that there are some fundamental principles on which everybody can be united regardless of the differences in their individual beliefs. However, the important question is, what are those principles? How does one understand what those principles are, on what basis? And that is where we come to the Vedic wisdom, where a very good understanding of Vedic knowledge, of scriptural knowledge, is essential. Of course, a blind implementation or enforcement of what we apparently understand from the Vedas unto the modern times will also not be effective. We cannot do, to use our modern language, a cut and paste job. You cannot just pick out something from 5,000 years ago and implement it just wholesale without discrimination, without understanding distinctions. So I cannot give a specific answer right now, but I have tried to give a general answer that in order to understand what to do when, it's a big topic, very deep topic, a topic that requires a lot of wisdom. It would also need a very deep understanding of divine knowledge, the scriptural knowledge, alongside with an experience of the world as well. So one has to be worldly wise and also otherworldly wise. Both forms of wisdom are necessary to have any form of good governance in the world.
Thank you very much, Maharaj. It was really very enlightening. Just continuing on that, on the same theme, you spoke about ethical and moral dilemma. Now, in the last several years, over the last decade, lots of the disasters in terms of crises that we have seen, I'm not talking about natural disasters, but more financial, economic, political crises, have been because of the breaking up of a governance model. So if it's in the corporate space or in the market space, it's the corporate governance model that has broken off. So whether it's talking about Enron, or talking about Satyam, or talking about the global financial crisis at the Wall Street that brought the whole world down, it's primarily on the basis of the breaking down of a governance model at an individual level and at a corporate level. Now, what the reaction to that of the industry, especially of the financial sector, of the corporate sector, has been to somehow or the other instill some kind of fear or policing by which we want to prevent those kind of disasters. Not because there is a great desire to make things better, but only because if you don't do it, then you make things much worse, and it could come to a situation where things will not be sustainable, and that's what kind of driving the fact that we have to govern by way of fear to ensure that individuals at an individual level don't succumb to the moral and ethical dilemmas. Now that's from the corporate side. That's spending billions of dollars doing courses on ethics, on morality, what's the right thing to do, etc. But it still seems we are far away from where we should be. There's of course improvement, and that's primarily on the platform of fear than anything else. But at an individual level, how can we ensure that, taking the same point, maybe I'll turn to you first, and then to Kailash, because you can talk from a corporate perspective in your role in PSU and also now in your own company. So how do we ensure that the individual, which doesn't operate only on the platform of fear, or is there any other way of looking at it? Because otherwise, we are, every day we wake up, we don't know where the next crisis is going to blow up, in spite of all the billions of dollars being spent on governance, corporate governance and otherwise.
Yes, your question brings me to a very important point. When we talk of governance, the general presumption is we are talking of either social governance, national governance, corporate governance, organizational governance. But very rarely is the term governance applied to oneself. Now, this is where the Vedic approach or the spiritual approach differs from the modern mundane approach. The modern mundane approach would apply theories of political science and management and so on and so forth to try to make things very effective and productive and fair and just and so on, according to ideas of prevailing ideas of morality. However, when you look at it from a spiritual point of view, you see that in all the modern approaches, perhaps, there is one thing that is missing, which is very fundamental, which is why all forms of governance, or let's say all forms of government, all political philosophies and ideologies and different forms of management do not give the desired result. And that is that one fails to acknowledge a very vital thing, that is human nature. Unless human nature is rectified, purified, spiritualized, unless one transcends the deficiencies of the innate human nature that we have, the conditioned nature that we have, any form of management or governance will prove to be ineffective. So, the Vedic system actually speaks primarily and fundamentally about self-governance first and foremost. Before one can be eligible to govern anybody else, whether at an individual level, at a family level, at a social level, or at a larger national level, one has to become eligible. And the eligibility criteria is self-governance. That is where dharma comes in the picture. Dharma is, of course, a big topic. We won't go into the subtle nuances of the term. Suffice it to say that unless the individual understands and lives by dharma, internally, externally, and in every respect, he or she will not be eligible to exercise the power of governance. And if I may be a little blunt, governance is all about power. What makes the difference between good governance and bad governance is that good governance is the very judicious, effective, and enlightened exercise of power, whereas bad governance is the opposite, where one's intentions may be wrong, or one's capabilities may be found lacking, or one's sense of discrimination may be found lacking. So therefore, in governance, the fundamental principle is we should govern ourselves first before we can govern others. Therefore, because power is something that can corrupt very easily, power is something that is used to influence other people for good or for bad, and everywhere in this world, power is necessary. You cannot avoid exercise of power in order to achieve anything in this world, good or bad. Therefore, if we want the good exercise of power, good governance at all levels, we have to ensure that the person who's exercising that power is suitably qualified. Has that person been spiritualized sufficiently? Has that person's mind and intelligence been purified sufficiently? In the Vedic times, the kings were not ordinary kings. They were Raj Rishis, as somebody mentioned this morning. They were kings, but they were also sages. And if you study the lifestyle of the kings and look at their timetables, their daily schedules, it is astonishing. Even as recently as the Arthashastra of Kautilya, of Chanakya, I say recently because compared to the vast history of the Vedic times, you will see that Chanakya recommends that a king should spend at least 6 to 8 hours for religious activities, including reading the scripture, hearing from saintly people, performing religious rituals, and various other such related things. So the king was supposed to be very, very thoroughly spiritually qualified. And even then, because being a king is a very difficult position, you're in the midst of so much power and opulence, and it could go to your head. And it happens so many times. So the king had to be also regulated and governed by another body. And that body would check that the king did not go, so to speak, off the handle. So therefore, the point to conclude, the point I'm making now is that the Vedic approach to governance begins with self-governance, self-management, controlling the self, understanding and disciplining one's own mind and senses, and developing some divine wisdom, by which any exercise of governance then will become very fruitful and productive for the whole society. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you very much. I wish we could publicize this to the broader world that spends billions of dollars on everything else besides self-governance or governance outside of here. Kailash, if I could turn the same question to you from your perspective, both having seen, having worked in the government on this topic, and now in your role in the corporate, in your company. Can you relate to this topic of self-governance, and what would your view on that?
Hello. I believe that Swamiji made a very, very, very nice point in about self-governance. In order to discipline others, we have to be disciplined ourselves. Like I tell you a very recent example which my father told me. He's like, what time do you reach office? I'm like, there's no fixed time. It depends upon if I have a meeting at 9, I'll reach at 8:30. If I have a meeting at 12, I'll reach at, let's say about 10:30. He's like, no. I call every person in my office should be at, if he has to be in office, he or she has to be in office at 10, you should be in the office at 10 too. If you have a meeting early, go early. If you have a meeting later, be at 10. That is when a self-policing kind of concept comes in. And if you have that in mind, it will be passed on. And in the government also, I was made to get into this shape because my boss used to be in the office at 10 a.m. And if he is in the office by 10 a.m., it's my moral responsibility to be in the office by 9:45 a.m. And that is a kind of self-governance which I learned in my early days of, you can say, as a professional or as a person who works. And Swamiji made a very nice point in about power and how power has to be given at the same time controlled. That is because we know that a very important aspect of governance, which I feel is delegation of work and accountability side by side. Because in the previous times, you used to see that the king used to delegate the work to his council of ministers, and somewhat the aspect is still prevalent, and a daily report would be taken. And now also typically in large-scale organization, we do see that there are strategic business units which are set up, and the departmental heads are there. And the delegation of work is there. They are given their job. At the same time, they are made accountable for their job. So it's very necessary for good governance that a kind of empowering your people is necessary. But at the time of when you're empowering, you need to make them accountable. Because if you give them absolute power and no responsibility, then we have a very famous saying that absolute power corrupts absolutely. At the same time, if you see the other side of the coin, if I just give you responsibility and no power, but that will create a sense of frustration in you. You'll be like, I'm just been given work, and what about the power? I have drawn up what I've drawn up, and if I don't have the power to implement it, and if it's not getting implemented in the right way, that will cause a demotivation in you. So that is a very important aspect, that is delegation and accountability side by side. Another important aspect, which I believe is the right leadership quality. When we talk about, let's say, a top-down approach, what does a top-down approach literally mean? It means that some instructions coming from the top, and that has to be followed by the subordinates. It's a peculiar management style. And if you look at it, a top-down approach, you need to have the right leadership skills. Like if you see various countries today in the modern time, those are well governed, you would see a very peculiar quality that about the leader, what his vision are, what his thoughts are, and how it is being empowered. If you see some of the Middle East countries, you would find why certain countries are developed. Those countries which are not running in a democracy, somewhere the quality of a leader comes in. And side by side, you have those examples just across the border where those countries have not progressed. And if you typically do a research on it, you will find that somewhere in the top-down approach, the leadership went haywire. So these are very two aspects that we need to look about. And another important aspect of corporate governance, when you mentioned the examples of Enron and WorldCom and Satyam, were about having an internal control setup. Why do we have the concept of an auditor? Why do corporates have a concept of an internal auditor and an external auditor? Same with the governance. Why there is a Comptroller and Auditor General of India? How do we get to know that there is misgovernance happening or there are scams happening? Because there is some kind of an intelligence or a spy working. And that is also needed in governance. Because if you feel that there is no one keeping an eye or a check on you, how would you motivate yourself to go the right path? And let's say if you're doing something wrong, not intentionally, but there should be someone, there should be some kind of an external or internal guidance, a checkpoint which should tell you that no, you're going wrong. So these are the key aspects of governance which I feel have to be embedded so that we follow the right path.
Thank you, Kailash. I have one question, but I'd hold on and ask if anybody in the audience would like to. I know in the earlier panels we probably didn't have enough time. I have 5 more minutes. So if anybody in the audience would like to ask a question to the panelists here. It's a very interesting topic. I'm sure it's close to everybody's heart.
As part of the government, let me ask you this question. Governance has 3 legs. One is the policy-making body, which is the legislature. The other one is the body that implements it. That's bureaucrats and ministers, whatever. And third is judiciary. We have in India an issue with all 3 of them. So where is India heading in this kind of a confused governance system?
Where is India heading? The government would be able to better answer that. But yeah, as we are all, I believe, able citizens and very visual citizens of this nation. So there's a 4th pillar called the media, also in the governance model. And media, I believe media acts as an auditor in the governance model. But media is also getting a lot of haywire in its role, creating more noise rather than being a 4th pillar of democracy. What I believe, sir, what I have actually seen in my whatever years of life I have lived, little bit till date is, there has to be some kind of coordination between the 3. Let's say the executive, the judiciary, and the third body, the policy making, legislature. We pass something, a legislature is passed. It's up to the executive and the bureaucrats to implement it. And if anything goes wrong, it goes to the court. What happens is that we have set up such a structure, such a complex structure, that proper coordination between all the 3 is not achieved. Maybe there are several reasons for it, which we cannot maybe discuss in a public forum, such as there are vested interest in all 3 of it. But what is required is coherence. If you see anything that if any issue or if anything we see good getting implemented in our nation, and if you track the reasons behind it, it's a strong will, I believe. So if all the 3 pillars, as well as the 4th pillar of our democracy, since we are the largest democracy in the world, and we should take pride in that, if there is a strong will, if there's a strong political will, if there's a strong executive will, if there's a strong legislature will, then things do happen. And somewhere first, and will is also related to the topic of self-governance, which Swamiji mentioned, that if you have that self-governance in you, automatically you will have that will to do that. And it's just like joining the dots. And if you join those dots, and we are on the path to progress, that is what I believe.
Thank you. I have one last question, and in the interest of time, we'll probably take 2 to 3 minutes for both of you to respond. Coming back to the point on self-governance, and what Maharaj mentioned, that self-governance has to have a framework of reference. And in today's day and time, our reference point seems to be pretty arbitrary. It's subjective. It's based on what one thinks over the other. It's your over mine. And what Maharaj was mentioning is that self-governance framework has to be on the basis of something which is absolute, which is not relative, which is the knowledge from the scriptures. So we've somehow avoided this topic in this forum, but I wanted to bring it up. So how do we bring that? Otherwise, we'll talk about self-governance, but we'll not talk about the framework. So how do we bring that into the broader life of people, whether it's in corporates, whether it's in institutions? I mean, recently the IIMs included Bhagavad Gita as a part of the curriculum, and I heard the dean, I think it's IIM Indore probably, the dean went live saying that we wanted to introduce Bhagavad Gita because we don't want to have another Satyam. He actually went public saying that, so which was a very bold step, I thought. So Maharaj, what in your view, how do we, because you see a lot of institutions, you see a lot of corporates, do you see that there is any way we can introduce those concepts? Otherwise, we'll miss the point again. We'll introduce a concept of self-governance, but we will not have the framework.
Yes, that's an important point. But you see, the problem is so fundamental that introducing this at such a late stage will not be effective. As they say, better late than never, but nevertheless, such things have to be deeply ingrained in one's psyche. It is hardly possible for somebody to change his whole nature and character in adult life. Therefore, when we talk of self-governance and therefore as a consequence, good public governance and private governance, we are speaking of catching him young, as they say, starting young. So the whole Vedic system is based upon education, spiritual education, moral education, right from the very beginning. So much so, it doesn't even wait till the onset of let's say 5 years of age when they normally start going to school. It doesn't even start in infancy. It doesn't even start when the child is in the mother's womb. It actually begins before that. When the to-be mother and father come together and they come in a very spiritual consciousness and they try to petition a good soul to come in, and there's a whole science behind it, a whole vast body of knowledge. And the society at large needs to be educated and trained in these very, very sublime principles. It is one of our great tragedies of the modern time that we have such a vast body of sublime knowledge available, and it is not being disseminated sufficiently today because we are very much enamored by modern knowledge. We are not opposed to modern knowledge, of course, but such modern knowledge has to be seen in the background of the transcendental or divine knowledge. Then we can have a very effective combination of the two to do good to the world. So attempts at self-governance should begin at a very early stage. The earlier the better, but never mind if it hasn't been done, that whatever stage in life it's introduced, that's better than nothing. So education is the process.
Thank you very much, Maharaj. Kailash, you would like to comment on the topic from your perspective, not so much on the government, but now in your own, in your own activities. Do you think some of these principles can be brought into, like Maharaj said, it's probably too late by the time you bring it in, it starts much later. But nonetheless, at a stage where you can, it's something better than nothing. Do you think some of these principles can be brought into a company in a non-sectarian way, where the basic principles of governance as per bona fide scriptures?
Yes, because it's never too late to begin. And I've actually seen corporates engaging in such activities. Because earlier to that, very rarely you would see that people working in an organization having a very conducive work environment. Now, if you see corporate offices, the work environment is such, it's such conducive that it actually invokes a spirit in you. Let me give you an example of an airline named Indigo. I observed a very nice thing about it, like when you enter an aircraft and when you enter the cockpit, they have a door for the crew, which only pilots and in the time of emergency, the people who are on the crew, they are allowed to enter. And they have pasted a small board before that, and it says that keep all your worry outside of this door, flying is a serious business. Now, it's such a nice thought. It's such a nice thought because flying is a serious business, not only for you, but for the 150, 200 odd passengers that you're flying. And it's like every day, let's say a pilot flies every day. He knows his job, but somewhere it reinstates in his mind. When he's about to enter, okay, he reads it, and then it invokes in you. And that is a kind of soft principle which I saw. And embarking on that, like learning from that, when I was about to renovate my office space, because an important aspect which I learned in my study was what influences your work other than yourself is your work environment, and how positive is your work environment. And it has to be somewhere very related to your line of business, because that is the kind of environment in which you create. So somewhere those snippets, those certain subtle thoughts, thoughts from the Gita, thoughts from the Quran, I've actually imbibed in and made it a note in my entire office building. So that somewhere while working, even if you have a glance at it, it somewhere influences you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So if you have no other questions, I would thank the panel for the wonderful thoughts and sharing of knowledge. And I hope everybody found some of those useful to take back with us, especially on the topic of self-governance and the framework of self-governance. I learned a lot myself. Thank you very much. Thank you, Kailash. Thank you, Maharaj.